Dad died when I was 13 years old. The memory I associate most strongly with him is the time he took us to his family cabin in New Hampshire. Autumn set all the leaves of the surrounding woods on fire and drove the midges and blackflies away. We spent the entire weekend hiking on Mount Monadnock and swimming around the lake nearby the cabin. At night, Dad told us silly ghost stories. I remember the three of us laughing together as we sang along to Leo Sayers' More Than I Can Say. And I remember seeing the stars one night, seeing them for the first time without any light pollution to obscure them, and being so stunned by their beauty that my heart nearly stopped. A few months after he died, Mom took me up to Maine to meet my paternal grandmother for the first time. On our drive up, my mom told me that while Grandma had agreed to let me stay at her house, she had a bad temper, and I needed to steer clear of her. She made me promise I would do my best to avoid upsetting Grandma before she let me leave the car. "I'll come back to pick you up in a week or so. Be a good girl for your grandmother, honey." And then, half to herself, "I can't wait for us to sell the house." I knew we needed to finish packing the house before we sold it. I wanted to help out, would have if not for the smiling men in black suits. According to my mom, they were just debt collectors who wanted to talk about Dad. I had been in complete agreement until 3 days ago, when I woke up in the middle of the night and thought I saw one of them standing outside my bedroom window, smiling at me and drooling. Mom said I must have been dreaming, and even though she was probably right, I still begged her to let me stay somewhere else for a while. Mom backed her car up, waved at me one last time, and drove away. I turned to see Grandma waiting for me on the porch, tapping her foot and glaring at me with dark, sunken eyes. She hadn't deigned to speak to my mom. Now, she said sharply, "Come along, then. I haven't got all day." We gave each other appraising looks. A disproportionately small head sat on Grandma's large, plump body, and her face reminded me of a shrunken apple, with a mouth full of too many teeth. Doughy flesh sagged from her arms. Dad used to read me Little Red Riding Hood every night, before I told him bedtime stories were for babies. Now a line from that story occurred to me. "Grandmother, what big teeth you have." Grandma lowered her face to mine. "During these next 2 weeks, you are not to bother me. You are not to stick your nose where it doesn't belong. And you are most certainly not allowed to enter the bedroom. Is that understood, Alyssa?" I nodded. She'd mispronounced my name as Alyssa instead of Elisa, but I didn't correct her. The truth was, Grandma frightened me. She looked over me like a witch out of a twisted fairy tale, and she smelled like mothballs. The obvious dislike in her eyes told me that if I ever put a toe out of line, she would make me regret it. As I followed Grandma into the house, I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a mistake by asking my mom to send me here. The upside of staying with Grandma was that she lived in a beautiful house right by Winter Hill Beach. The surf roared at me constantly, and at night it was like listening to the heartbeat of some giant animal. Those first few days I would run to the living room as soon as I woke up, because it had huge windows that faced the sea. For such an idyllic place, it was oddly deserted. There were no families out there with their towels and beach umbrellas. No kids my age or younger building sandcastles or riding the waves on boogie boards. And no college students partying around bonfires or playing volleyball. The downside of staying with Grandma was that she terrified me more and more as each day passed. She spent mornings and afternoons in her bedroom, the door firmly shut and locked. Late at night, usually around 3 a.m., she left the house to walk along the beach. Early on in my stay, I went to her bedroom one afternoon to ask where she kept spare paper towels. Before my knuckles could do so much as brush the door, Grandma leapt out with her hands stretched into claws and shrieked at me to leave, causing me to drop the empty paper towel roll. As she slammed the door shut, I caught a brief glimpse of something moving behind her. Something that cast a grotesque and misshapen shadow. After that, I stayed out of her way as much as possible. It was on the 5th day of our week together that I found Grandma's book. I only noticed it because I knocked the remote control to the floor. She had hidden the book under one of the living room couches, the one opposite the windows looking out over the beach. The book's cover was made of a soft, stretchy material that felt strangely familiar under my hands, although I didn't recognize it. I considered putting the book back under the sofa, I really did. But frankly, I was bored. And lonely. Since my mom had left, I hadn't spoken to another living soul. Grandma yelling at me didn't count. My only options for entertainment were a couple of National Geographic magazines dating back to the late 70s, a TV that went on the fritz more often than not, and collecting seashells on the beach for the 1,000th time. What harm could it do if I read a few pages? Decision made, I opened the book, and immediately dropped it with a cry of disgust. The first page had depicted a naked woman and something embracing her. Something inhuman with half a dozen black eyes and needle-sharp teeth. Together, they held a small, bleeding body between them. I couldn't tell what it was supposed to be because it had been flayed open. My heart pounding, I picked the book back up carefully, as if it could bite me. I flipped through the next few pages and discovered that the book had been written in a foreign language. I only knew English and Mandarin Chinese, the latter because my mom's grandparents had immigrated to America from Changda. This language was neither. I peered at the page more closely. The longer I stared at the words, the more they seemed alive. As I watched, the words began to writhe and wriggle across the page like small black worms. Various images flashed through my mind. I saw a crumbling white tower near the bottom of the sea, in the abyssal zone, where there was no light and I shouldn't have been able to perceive it. I saw the ghostly figures of hundreds of children, laboring to repair the tower and build it even higher. The children wept as they worked. They all had terrible wounds, and one child cradled his decapitated head in both arms. I saw creatures in the shape of manta rays, with wingspans approximately 40 feet, covered with multiple bulging black eyes and beaked mouths. They descended on any child who tried to run. I saw an enormous ball of neon blue light that pulsed and flickered, beckoning me forward. And underneath everything else, in the unfathomable depths of the ocean where no human had ever gone, something leviathan in size stirred in the darkness, and sent a lone fish with bony rays darting away. The sound of the telephone ringing, and the fearful thought that Grandma might leave her room to answer it, caused me to drop the book. Instantly, the images vanished, and I became aware of a piercing pain in both eyes. As I clapped my hands over them, I touched something wet. Blood. My eyes had been bleeding while I read the book, and my legs shook, as though I'd just gotten off a roller coaster that had done several barrel rolls and inverted loops. Was I down there in the ocean, watching dead children slave away for the creatures under the sea? Or was I back in my own body, standing in the middle of the living room? After the dizziness faded away, I slid the book back under the couch, trying to make sure that it was back in exactly the same spot. Then I retreated to my bedroom and dwelled on everything I'd seen. I told myself countless times to stop thinking about it, to forget it. I might as well have told myself to stop breathing or learn how to fly. I had to find out more. I had to. Curiosity burned inside of me, threatening to engulf my body in its unbearably hot flames. I saw the ball of neon blue light every time I closed my eyes. If I could just see what lived underneath it. Grandma must know what it is. It's her book. How could I convince her to tell me? I slammed my right fist into the palm of my other hand. I couldn't. She would never tell me. And if she found out that I'd been reading the book, she might kick me out. Or do something even worse. A persuasive voice spoke to me then, sly and wheedling. Go inside her bedroom. You'll be able to find out more if you do that. I hesitated for a moment, remembering how my mom had made me promise not to upset Grandma. But who said Grandma would ever find out? Tonight, after she left for one of her late-night beach walks, I would slip into her bedroom, search for more information on the book, and slip back out before she ever realized I'd been there. What could go wrong? I crept out of my bedroom after hearing the now familiar slam of the front door closing. The shoe rack confirmed what I'd suspected. Grandma had left. The fuzzy slippers she usually wore around the house, and which her sweat had long since stained yellow, sat on the shoe rack in place of the blue sneakers she wore outdoors. Still, a small part of me couldn't help but wondering, what if she hadn't left? What if she was sitting on the couch with the lights off, her enormous white body motionless, watching me with her dark, sunken eyes? And what if she expected me to go down the hallway and open the door? Was in fact waiting for it? and as soon as I did, she would dig her long, dirty fingernails into my shoulder, wrench me around to face her, and... It took 1,000 years to walk down the dark hallway leading to Grandma's bedroom. I knew I should turn around and go to sleep, and still I continued moving forward. I pictured a shadowy figure hovering above me and manipulating puppet strings attached to my feet, but that was just an excuse. My curiosity drove me forward, nothing else. As I reached out to open the bedroom door, I recalled in vivid detail one of the illustrations that had accompanied Bluebeard. Another fairy tale my dad used to read me before I slept. The illustration had shown Bluebeard's newest wife opening the forbidden closet door, glancing around furtively as she did so, only to freeze in horror at the sight of his previous wives dangling from the ceiling, their blood staining the wooden floorboards red. Maybe I've made a mistake. Right as this thought occurred to me, I heard the front door slam open. The taste of copper filled my mouth. I would never be able to make it back to my own bedroom in time. Without hesitation, I opened the bedroom door and stepped through. Grandma had left black candles burning around the room, and their dim light illuminated a king-size bed as well as a table directly across from it. The room was bare of any other furniture. No dresser, no nightstands, no armchair. Heavy footsteps thudded down the hallway. There was only really one place to hide: underneath the bed. I threw myself down and managed to thrust my arms and my head through, and then the bed frame jabbed into my shoulders, trapping me in place. I laid there, 3/4 of my body visible, and dug my toes frantically into the floor to try and propel myself forward. Gritting my teeth against the pain in my shoulders, I managed to scrape them past the bed frame. The rest of my body slithered easily under the bed. Just in time. The door flew open and Grandma's slippers whistled against the floor as she shuffled in. I heard a click that signaled the door had been locked. Panic gnawed at my stomach. I was trapped here until she fell asleep. And if she didn't fall asleep, I'd be stuck here an entire day until she left again tomorrow night. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was too dry. Please, please, please let Grandma go to sleep soon. Thud. I raised myself up enough to see that Grandma had fallen to her knees in front of the only other piece of furniture in the room, her back to me. I noticed now that an odd assortment of knickknacks had been scattered across the table. A huge seashell conch, a bell, several pairs of baby shoes, and other items I couldn't make out. Grandma genuflected several times, lowering her head until it touched the floor. Neither of my parents had raised me to believe in any particular religion. Instead, they'd preferred feeding me a steady diet of fairy tales and episodes from the X-Files. I had, however, attended Catholic school for 2 years before we moved to Massachusetts. I could tell that the table was meant to be Grandma's altar, and that she was praying. Grandma shouted words in an unfamiliar language. They hurt my ears, not because of the volume with which she shouted them, but because they somehow had the auditory equivalent of sharp little spikes. They stung, and I flinched away from them. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough space under the bed for me to back up any further. She turned to a small and wriggling bundle beside her. I'd been too absorbed in her strange behavior to notice it before. It made a fussing noise. Grandma brought her arm down in an abrupt motion, and the noise stopped. "Glory to you, my lord. I bring the sacrifice so that I might join you under the sea." Sacrifice? Forgetting myself, I tried to push myself onto my elbows and immediately slammed the top of my head against the bed frame. The pain brought tears to my eyes. That didn't matter, though, because I could see what she held up to the air now. A baby. One of indeterminate age and gender, with a chubby face and big, dark blue eyes. It stared unseeingly at the altar. Uncertain light from the candles showed me the deep gash in its throat. It had one tiny hand outstretched as if to flag someone down for help. Mercifully, I only saw it for a few seconds before Grandma tossed it to the floor and the darkness hid it from view. She raised both arms again, swaying in place to music only she could hear. As I watched, my entire body trembling as though in the grip of a deadly fever, a piece of the darkness detached from the shadows of the altar. It advanced to where she'd set down the baby. I knew that shape. I'd seen it when I'd asked Grandma where she kept her spare paper towels. And although I hadn't realized it until now, I'd seen it again while reading the book. It had been one of the creatures tormenting the dead children. It's just a shadow, my mind gibbered. It can't hurt you. It can't hurt anyone. A slurping sound. Loud chewing and frenzied gulps. Something tearing meat apart and gnawing on tiny bones. I closed my eyes, desperately telling myself that this couldn't be what I thought. Only fear of what Grandma would do to me if she discovered me here kept me from bolting. Unexpectedly, images began to flash through my mind. The same ones I'd seen when I read the book earlier. No. This time they were more than two-dimensional images. I was there, inside of them. I flew above the ocean, the salty spray of the waves splashing against my face. A freezing wind tore at my clothes and whipped my hair around my face as I swooped downwards, like a cormorant diving into the waves to hunt fish. Except I didn't fly back up. No. I went deeper into the ocean. I struggled, wondering if this vision was real enough to drown me or be crushed by the pressure of the depths. Neither happened. I could still breathe and move, though an inexorable force dragged me downwards. I sped past the white tower and the dead children who sought to build it higher, past the beings that looked like monstrous manta rays, the beings that my grandmother worshipped as gods. I kept ascending. The mysterious blue light grew closer and closer, bobbing back and forth in the darkness. I felt compelled to touch it, to hold it in my hands. Yet that same inexorable force ripped me away from the inviting blue light. Down, down, down. That was when I realized that the light had been attached to something all along. Something at the very bottom of the sea. Finally, I saw it. And it saw me. One eye rolled open to regard me, round as the eye of a giant squid, but infinitely larger. A band of shimmering colors surrounded its black pupil. I could put no names to those colors because they didn't exist on Earth. The eye disappeared momentarily from view and then reappeared. This movement sent shockwaves through the water, and I heard the screams of the children who labored at the foot of the White Tower. High, despairing screams. The screams of the lost and the damned. Within that one eye, I saw an alien planet where up was down, right was left, day was night, and where insanity-inducing beings in the sky fed on the anguish of those below. An ecstasy of pure terror surged through me, turning me into a heaving, whimpering mass of nerve endings. Terror filled every corner of my mind and obliterated all rational thought. One scream after another tore itself free from my throat, deep guttural shrieks that I had never known existed within me. I couldn't have stopped screaming if I tried. Its eye remained fixed on me, even as it sifted through my mind the way a gold prospector strains sand from gold. Suddenly, I wasn't floating at the bottom of the ocean, staring down at something that hurt my brain to look at. I wasn't back in Grandma's bedroom, either. Instead, I sat in the back of the car, too excited to stay still. We were on our way to Dad's family cabin in New Hampshire, the one he'd inherited from his great-grandparents, and I couldn't wait to swim in the lake and hike Mount Monadnock again. Mom had also finally agreed to go apple picking with us. The radio whirled out Bryan Adams' Everything I Do, and my dad sang along with it, purposely off-key to make me laugh. He turned to smile at me, and my mom shrieked, "Adam, look out!" Our tires squealed as Dad tried to swerve us out of the way of the semi-truck barreling towards us. I briefly saw the truck driver's white, trembling face before he disappeared from view. I cried out in alarm as the side of his truck began to fill our windshield. First a little, then all at once. And still it kept racing toward us, filling not only our windshield, but now the entire world, until all I could see was the black letters on its side screaming, "Penville Motor Freight." I wake up to the sound of Mom crying. My head was in her lap, and her hands touched my face, my arms, checking me over for injuries. We were outside the car. I turned my head and saw that the front of the car had been crumpled into an accordion. The asphalt burned every exposed inch of my skin. I pulled away from her. "Where's Daddy?" "Don't, Elisa, don't." But I did. I stumbled to my feet and brushed away my mom's hands. I took 2 steps forward and saw the watch Dad always wore. The one with the brown leather strap and 3 small silver clocks inside its face. It was lying on the ground by itself. I picked it up and noticed it was still warm. Blood began to run down it in a thick line. Clutching the watch to myself, hugging it even though the blood smeared the front of my t-shirt, I took another 2 steps forward and saw my dad. Except, I didn't know it was him at first. The car crash had spilled his broken and torn body onto the burning asphalt. My dad's dark blue eyes stared unseeingly at the cars whizzing past us. A huge swath of blood trailed from him to my feet. Behind me, my mom started screaming. And then that hellish day started again. And again and again. How many times did it make me relive the day my dad died? How many times did I pick up my dad's bloody watch? How long before I became bored of my agony and fell back into an uneasy sleep? I don't know. What I do know is that the idea of this torment never ending, the very concept of the future, became a cruel and pointless joke. There was only the present, and the present was endless. My mind started to fray under the pressure of remembering grief like a well-worn rope close to snapping in 2 pieces. When I came back to myself, I was in Grandma's bedroom, my throat raw and aching from screaming. I had ripped off 3 fingernails from my left hand from clawing at the underside of her bed. I turned my neck on rusty hinges to see a line of wet footprints leading to the altar. The bedroom was empty. I knew then that Grandma had descended, and now lived under the ocean by the White Tower. I don't know what happened after that. I must have run out of the bedroom and away from Grandma's house. Maybe I hitchhiked my way back from Winter Hill Beach to Pennville, or took a Greyhound bus. The next thing I remember is standing in front of our house, knocking on the door and crying so hard that I could barely breathe. My mom ran out and hugged me, asking me where I'd been all this time. 2 weeks had passed. I couldn't answer her. When I think too much about what sleeps under the sea, I want to start screaming and never stop. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that it took something from me that day. For the past few years, I've lived in a glass cocoon. The only emotions that can get through are terror, rage, grief, and exhaustion. I can't feel happiness anymore, much less love. Most days, I can't feel anything at all. My mom took me to a therapist who told me I'd hallucinated it all. He prescribed medication, taught me grounding exercises, and gave me cognitive behavioral therapy worksheets. It didn't work. All it did was confirm what I already suspected. No one believed me and never would. Therapy wasn't a complete waste of time, though. I often relive that moment in my nightmares. The moment when I stared into a colossal eye and saw an alien planet. When that happens, and I wake up not knowing where I am, the grounding exercises help me anchor to the present. They remind me that I am in my bed in Nebraska, somewhere that is surrounded by 3 other states on all sides from the nearest bay, gulf, or ocean. I don't ever want to see any ocean again, especially the Atlantic Ocean. On that day at Grandma's house, I learned that there's something sleeping down there at the very bottom. Something incomprehensible in its vastness. Something that was old back when our ancestors still lived in caves and hunted food with sharpened sticks. Something worshipped by other gods. When it finally awakens and rises from the sea, it will bring untold suffering and insanity to every living thing on this planet. And death won't be the end for any of us. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupeHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.